Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to talk about what behavioral insight can really do for you. My name is Kim Bussey. I'm the Key Relationship Manager with Omnia. Quick housekeeping tips. At the top of your screen, there is an icon of a person with their hand raised. If you can hear me, go ahead and raise your hand. We did have some technical issues. Wonderful. So everyone's hearing me. Perfect. Also, if you agree or disagree with anything I say, go ahead and let me know. If you need me to speak a little louder or a little softer, you can select those. If you want me to speed up or slow down, and always laughter and applause is always appreciated. As well as if you have any questions, we're going to take comments and questions as we go along. Our Lunch and Learn webinars, if this is your first time joining us, are meant to be interactive. I want to ask you some questions. I want you to share some best practices. Go ahead and type in. We'll do a Q&A at the end as well. And our webinars are recorded. So if for some reason you have to step away or experiencing some audio issues or just love what we're saying and want to go back and listen to our other ones, we do record them. They'll be up on our YouTube channel in about a week. Make sure that you're following us on our social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. You'll receive some great notifications, as well as let you know when those recorded webinars are available. So let's go ahead and get started. So there I was, 20 years old, proud to have been promoted to manager of a retail clothing store. It was small, but I was the manager. What other 20-year-old could be like, woohoo? Could I sell? Absolutely. Did I put in the hours? No problem. But then one day, terror struck because I'm having to hire. And I'm sitting across a table in the food court, and I'm have an application in my hand, and I'm looking at this person, and I'm thinking, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. This is a lot of pressure. How in the world am I supposed to decide between this person and the other people? Ah! If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, all of my little emotions were running around, and on the outside, I'm just kind of smiling, going, okay, let's fake it till we make it. How many of you have ever been in that position of saying, I'm interviewing, and I don't know what I'm asking for? Please raise your hand. Thank you. So I am not alone in this feeling. That was many years ago. I'm not going to tell you quite how many years ago it was. And over that time, I have done interview after interview after interview, moving from retail to banking to business development and people management, and now here with Omnia. However, sometimes that fear still strikes. You know, I'm looking at someone and they're dressed appropriately and they say the right things and they do the right things, but really and truly, how am I going to really recognize the differences and make the best hire? Do I go with my gut because I like them? Do I go with the resume because there wasn't any typos in it? What do I do? Because on interview day, your candidate should be well prepared. They should show up knowing exactly what to say, how to dress, how to shake hands, because if you Google how to interview well, in less than 1 minute, you're going to get over 1 billion, billion with a B, 1 billion hits. Not to mention there's coaches, there's career training, there's specialists that will help them on everything on how to phrase and resumes, to arriving on time, to shaking hands, to the most common questions that are asked. And so if we're going strictly on interviewing, sometimes we think we've made the right hire and they're looked appropriately, they look like the best candidate, but after we hire them, this is what we get. Maybe not immediately, but after a while, you know, a week, 2 weeks, a couple of months, we find out that, okay, that best hire wasn't really the best person. How in the world did I get to this? Maybe they're showing up late. Maybe they're thinking, oh my gosh, they said they could multitask, but if I give them more than one thing at a time, forget it. I've never worked with someone so sensitive. Or they said that they could sell, but they really, really can't. How do I really determine what am I getting? Am I looking just at the face value? And that's what we're going to talk today. We're going to really talk about how behavioral insight, how asking the right questions, uncovering those natural behavioral traits, diving a little bit deeper below what the candidate says and does to really uncover, can they sell? Are they going to be able to give that top-notch customer service? Or are there some areas that we need to work on? Is there some areas of improvement? And I always tell my clients that I talk to ask two questions. Can I coach this, and do I have the time and desire to coach them? And if the answer is no to either one of them, those questions, then you're doing yourself and the new hire a disservice. But as you're asking yourself those questions, really, how do you uncover those behaviors? How do you know what's necessary to be successful in a position with your company? How do you know what the behaviors are going to be strongest under times of stress? Are they going to come back and be super aggressive? Really using the behaviors to motivate and train them during the onboarding process. And also looking at those behaviors that can be developed for promotion. So I said that this was going to be interactive. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So one, when you're interviewing, what qualities are you looking for in a candidate? Go ahead and type in the box for me. Maybe you're looking for someone who has hard skills. They have to have certain license, intelligence. Absolutely. What are some of those intangible behavioral traits that you're looking for? See, we have a ton of people typing. We're going to go ahead and let them, the drive to grow and improve. That's critical, right? You want them to always be that person to move forward. What are some other things that we're looking for? Flexibility and that desire to learn, attitude, work ethic, enthusiasm. Absolutely. Got a couple more people, communication and commitment. So think about this. Communication is key. It's one of the two areas where we see the greatest potential for conflict within a team. How are they going to talk to each other? Where is that disconnect? Everything settles down to it. And what's interesting is when you look at these qualities, none of them are those hard skills. None of them are they need to have a license to sell insurance. None of them are they need to have an educational background, because we kind of filter that out. What we're really looking for is those behaviors. What is that something? What is that that's really going to be able to make sure that they're a good fit in our organization and in the position? And that's really what behavioral insight can assist with that. For Omnia, we've been in business since 1985, celebrating 31 years, and we offer those validated behavioral-based selection and management tools. We've worked with over 1.3 million behavioral profiles processed with clients worldwide. That gives us that credibility to say, in certain roles, we know what are those foundations, what are those natural behavioral traits that are going to be successful in this position. Because a lot of times we hear, well, can I ask that question? I don't know. Maybe, really what is a behavioral assessment? So when we talk about that, let's talk about some common thought processes. One, true or false? It's illegal to use a behavioral assessment as a pre-employment tool. True, false, or I'm not sure. The next question I want to ask is, behavioral assessments take up too much time. True, false, or the longer the test, the better the results. I want them to sit in that office for quite a bit. And then behavioral assessments are too expensive. True or false? Go ahead and let me know. So I see overwhelmingly we've got some great
information. So yes, um, some of you are well educated with this. Depending on what you're doing and how you're using that behavioral assessment is really going to help you. So the first question, is it legal to use a behavioral assessment as a pre-employment test, is completely false as long as you use it consistently. You want to make sure that you're remaining and you're using a test that's been validated to stay within those ADA and EEOC compliance. Assessments are too expensive. Once again, false. Let me ask you this. If you make a bad hire, studies have said that the cost is typically about 1.5 times the annual salary. When you start figuring in not only the training time that you paid that employee, and or did they make it past that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, um, the HR time, the cost of advertising, the cost of the interview time of the interviewer, the manpower hours. If it's a revenue generating position, that could actually increase to 3 to 4 times the annual salary. So when you put it into perspective, if you have a tool that you can look at and say, wow, this is going to tell me, are they a good fit for this position and where their strengths and challenges are, why wouldn't you use it? So behavioral assessments take up too much time. There are quite a variety out there, and it really depends on the assessment. I know with Omnia, it's not timed. It takes a candidate typically 10 to 15 minutes to complete the assessment. Quick, easy, to the point. It allows them to really get those natural responses. And then another common thought is that an assessment is a pass or fail test, and that is absolutely false. A behavioral insight, behavioral assessments are not pass or fail. There are no good and bad natural behavioral traits, those foundational traits. What we do know, though, is that some are more successful in different roles. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. So one of the questions I'm always asked is, okay, so Kim, you talk about behavioral insight, how should we use it? Is it an end all be all? Is it, 5%? Is it 25%? What is it? So let's talk about this. Your interview process is made up of so many different components. On the left hand of the pie chart, we're going to see, education, work experience, skills, potential, all of that comes from your resume. Do they have the education needed? Do they have the work experience? Are the potential is they're just out of college? Do they have that? What are you looking for? Some of that potential. Maybe they've displayed it because you're looking for a leader and they've been a captain of a team or the president of a club, or they've gone out and done community service or internships that you can draw out off of. That's about 25% of that hiring process. I want to skip down to background drug tests. Those are what we always like to call those last minute obstacles. They are truly pass or fail. You passed our background check. You passed the drug test. You passed the credit check. And those are contingent. Typically, offers are contingent on them passing, the candidates passing, especially with the new laws going into effect in several of our states that you can't ask on your application, are there any criminal, have you been convicted of a felony? References used to be a lot higher percentage. We used to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, so tell me about Kim. Was she on time? Is she a multitasker? And people would share everything. But now, as litigation has increased, a lot of times you'll just get, yes, I would hire, no, I wouldn't. These are the dates that she worked. So you want to look at social media a little bit more. So with that social media, you're going to look at definitely their professional sites such as LinkedIn, but also look at their social media. What are they posting? Look at their grammar and punctuation. It's a great example of their written word. And if you have a position where you are working with clients, where there is that back and forth and understanding where we're going with this, and I've got to communicate via email, their written communication is key. Well, I want to focus a little bit more on that right-hand side. So, and a behavioral assessment such as the Omnia and the interview impression are a partnership. They go hand in hand. So your interview impression is going to be able to give you those tangible viewpoints. Did they arrive on time? Were they dressed appropriately? How did they treat the receptionist? And that's key for me is I want to make sure, like, how are they going to talk with people who are the gatekeepers, especially if it's in a sales role or a service role where they're having to constantly build those relationships. Um, you know, how well did they articulate themselves? Did asking some of those questions, make a presentation for me. We were recently doing some interviewing, and one of our roles is going to require the new employee to conduct webinars such as this and make presentations. So we said, pick a subject, take a couple of moments, think about it, pick a subject and present to us. We wanted to hear, to see those mannerisms of how it fits into our culture. How well could they adapt on the fly, so to speak, to give that information to us. But there's still, even though there may be some elements of surprise in the interview impression, once again, a well-prepared candidate is going to come in with questions, with having researched your client, your company, having researched you. I guarantee that they've looked at your LinkedIn to find out those connection points. I want to be likable. I want to make sure that I'm making the best first impression. And that's where that behavioral insight comes into play. It's going to allow you to dive deeper beneath what the candidate is saying to really uncover those natural behavioral traits. Because there are certain words that we use all of the time. I want a good communicator. Well, what's your definition of a good communicator? I want someone who's multitasking. Once again, oh, I can multitask. We need some attention to detail. Well, I have attention to detail, and you may have, but it all comes into degrees. What are your building blocks? So with Omnia, we look at 4 cornerstones to build the foundation of those natural behavioral traits. And those are the candidate's communication style, assertiveness, their pace and adaptability, and that need for structure. What we're really looking at is, think of it this way. You can have a building block, and they can come in all shapes and sizes. Some are very tall and very wide because they need to have that cornerstone to really support the foundation of that building. It's as solid as possible. But for others, you may have a brick, a little thinner, a little smaller, but it's still there. You still have that same level of assertiveness. You still have, you still have that dash of assertiveness. You still have, the same communication style, but the amount that you have is going to help determine what makes you successful. Now, what behavioral assessments do not measure is that work experience and education level, intelligence. If you're looking for an assessment for intelligence, then you want to look at some of those cognitive assessments. Behavioral assessments don't measure the hard skills. Can they turn on the computer? Do they have that opportunity, the education, the licenses that they need? We don't measure integrity and compassion. And really for behavioral assessments, there's not one that truly, truly measures integrity. It's so much in compassion, and there are some that say we measure it, but to truly get to the heart of it, so it's a tough thing to measure. We don't look at environmental influences, and a strong behavioral assessment is not going to measure psychological or physical disorders. They measure well behaviors. How is someone going to react within a certain position? So let's talk about that for a moment. When we're talking about positions, what are some of the traits that successful salespeople have? Maybe you have a sales team. What are those traits that you're looking for? And then in the bottom right-hand corner, let's talk about what some of those traits are needed to be successful in a service role. Maybe it's customer service. Maybe it's more of those back ends. You can pick one, type what you think is necessary for either a successful salespeople and or for service in our service role. And we see people typing away. So resilience, absolutely. When they're told no, they've got to take a step back and say, that really means not yet. They can do it. You know, for service is that follow through. Are they going to be able to say, okay, I've got a process in place and I want to make sure that my I's are dotted and my T's are crossed? Okay, so there's got to be more. Are we only looking for resilience in salespeople in service roles? What about for salespeople, assertiveness? They've got to be able, tenacity, absolutely. I'm going to go after that goal. I want it. If it's a commission-based environment, they've got to be willing to take some risk, right? Aggressiveness, absolutely. And watching that aggressiveness so that doesn't turn into almost a bullying where they are overpowering and overcoming the prospect. For service, we're looking for detail oriented, right? They want to make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Here's what I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing the same qualities in both, other than ability to read the client. Sometimes the ability to read a client is necessary in both sales and service. And that comes a lot from really that communication piece. But when you look at the examples that we're giving, they're direct opposites of each other. You don't want someone in a service role to be aggressive. You want them to be supportive, to really have that collaborative and helpful ability. Think of it as more of that farmer who's gathering in everything. Absolutely know when to back off so that I don't want to be too pushy. Solid communication skills are needed for both sales and service, but definitely for the salespeople. Can they balance that ability to listen as well as that ability to really dive into the heart of the matter, to ask those correct questions and really uncover it? We talked about those 4 building blocks of communication style, assertiveness, you know, pace and adaptability and that need for structure. And then what we're going to talk about is how those play into it when we're looking at those strengths. So when we're talking about someone who's assertive, think of your typical salesperson, right? They're assertive, they're proactive, they're risk takers. They're let me in. However, they can sometimes come across as so aggressive that they're overbearing and extremely me-centric. You really want to dive a little bit deeper to know, is this person going to be great on my sales team? Or are they going to be a little bit more of that person where I'm going to step on you to get what I want? That is not what we're looking for. Typically, in that salesperson, you want them to have all of these ideal skills. But once again, if I ask you right now, so how many of you consider yourself proactive? Raise your hands. I'm sure I'm going to start I'm seeing hands popping up all over. Yes, so pretty much everybody in that quick moment has raised their hand to say, yes, 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 I am proactive. But proactive can look a little bit different. So in a salesperson, that proactiveness comes across with, hi, I'm Kim. Let me tell you about Omnia. Whereas on the service side, that proactiveness may come across more along the lines as a reactive proactive. And what I mean by that is it's a little bit more of that collaboration. It's a little bit more of when I'm asked, I'm going to be proactive. Or if it's task focused, I can be proactive, but I don't want to be that person knocking on doors. When you think of the ideal service person, their strengths tend to be more collaborative. They offer those options. They're more needs-based. So even if they're in a more of an account rounding, cross-selling role, they still want to focus on what the client needs. So some of those challenges can be very cautious. They're team-oriented. They're perceived as an order taker. Tell me what you want. This is key to understand because you want to make sure that would you want someone who's more of that collaborative, cautious order taker in a high pressure sales role? No. Do you want someone who's so assertive that they're going to overpower everything to be in that, you know, collaborative support role? Probably not. So it's understanding the different degrees of behaviors and allowing that behavioral insight to say, these are what's needed to be successful in a sales role, and this is what's needed to be successful in a technician or administrative or whatever role you're looking for. And now let's talk about how that candidate compares to that. Let's talk about their strengths. Let's talk about their challenges. And once again, can I coach it? Do I have the time and desire to? So communication style, within our 31 years, we've looked at communication style and we've broken it down into two areas, relational and analytical. So those relational communicators are those people. They've never met a stranger. They network easily. If you're a leader, you build that excitement. You kind of, great job, everyone. We're on the right path. Relational communicators almost always interview well. And if you're interviewing for a salesperson, sometimes they can seem like a successful salesperson, but then when you hire them, then you uncover, everyone loves them. They're a great person, but they can't close a deal. Why can't they close a deal? Now you have a struggle. And can you coach it? Possibly, but is it always going to be a struggle for them? Probably. Wouldn't you like to know that before you hire them rather than after? Also, we have those analytical communicators. So they tend to be more factual and concise, great at active listening. However, sometimes they can come across as blunt and, have difficulties with building reports. They are very factual. So they're going to process internally versus speaking out loud. So when it comes to interviewing, sometimes that analytical communicator is a little bit tougher to interview. They measure every word before they speak it. Then you look at pace and adaptability. And once again, it's not that there's a good or bad behavioral trait. It's really understanding what's necessary in the role to understand what's needed. So I have a colleague who described this beautifully, is that if you look at a person's level of assertiveness and their need for structure as the main ingredients of a cake, it's your egg and your flour, right? Their communication style, their pace and adaptability are kind of what gives it the flavor. Are we going to have vanilla or chocolate or strawberry? It's understanding those inner dynamics that come together that help you really understand not only new candidates, but those existing employees that you have on staff. What are some of the difficulties that they're experiencing? So when we're looking at pace and adaptability, one of those strengths, someone's strengths may be that they're very fast paced. They love in a sales role to handle multiple clients in different stages, and I've got a plan, but this client calls and says, I'm ready to sign the contract and I'm switching gears, and love that. But for those extremely fast paced people, short-term goals are best for them, because if it's long-term, they're like, I've lost interest. I'm bored. Or they could overextend themselves. And think about yourself too when you're looking at some of these behavioral traits. As you're hearing about them, ask, do I overextend myself? Yeah, I can take care of that for you. No problem. Ooh, I promised Matt I'd do something. I don't remember what it is, but it'll come back to me. Understanding those challenges before you hire them is key, and assist when it comes to really understanding as well. How am I going to onboard them? How am I going to train them? What's the pace of my office? Is it that faster pace? Or do we allow our employees to have some of those, I'm going to see one thing through to completion? If that person is a see one thing through to completion, their strengths are they're going to be methodical, their processes. In a sales role, it's going to be long sales cycles. So Raise your hand if I said, okay, tomorrow all of you have new jobs. You're going to be working in accounting, and your role for 8 hours is going to be processing invoices. So you'll put in the client's name, generate the invoice, and either email it or stuff it in an envelope for direct mailing. You may receive 4 calls per day, and we want you to process the invoices the rest of the time. How many of you would run screaming from the room in about an hour going, I can't take this anymore. It is so boring. Give me something else to do. See some hands raising. That is me. I love working on multiple things. But there are people whose natural behavioral traits are, they're like, man, that's perfect. I don't have to talk with people. I can handle the processes. Do I have some time to look at it to say, okay, I'm going to, expand on the efficiency of this process? I'm great. Some of the challenges, though, are if they're working with multiple clients at a time, it could cause stress because I can't finish what I'm doing in constant change. It's understanding that and using the behavioral insight, which is going to help you, as I said, not only for selection, but for development. Prior to becoming to Omnia, I worked in a banking industry and managed a branch, and I am that fast-paced person. I love working multiple things. I would go back and forth, behind the teller line, going out, bringing in new business, helping with the accounts. Loved it. In fact, I would get bored. Prior to moving up into a branch manager, I was a teller, and part of the job was, okay, I've got to face the front, but I've got to be aware of people coming through the drive-thru and bouncing back and forth. As I got promoted, I had a great employee who was a fabulous teller, loved her. However, she could only focus on one area at a time. If she was working at the front facing the lobby, then we would have people in the drive-thru honking their horns and pressing their call letters going, I've waited for 2 minutes. No one's even acknowledged me. And I can see there's nobody in your office. If I had her facing the drive-thru, then she missed the people in the lobby. It's because she was very process oriented, and she wanted to keep her eye on the prize, and that's wherever she was facing. Could she work quickly? Yes, but it was having to have that constant change of going, am I looking at the lobby? Am I looking at the drive-thru? Am I looking at the lobby? I got to look at both of them. What we did to solve that problem is we put her in the right seat on the right bus. And we actually had her focus strictly on the drive-thru, not on the lobby, so that then she could handle 5, 6, 7 different drive-thru lanes. The customers loved her. She built this rapport where people wouldn't even come into the branch anymore. They just wanted to come through the drive-thru and talk to Darlene, and would wait for her. They would wait for her to finish to be able to help her. But it was because I recognized one of the challenges. I wish I had had behavioral insight to tell me this beforehand. It would have saved so much time and trouble. But we recognized the challenge and we adapted so that we could utilize their strengths. And that's really, truly what the heart of a behavioral insight does, is what are their strengths? What are their challenges? Let's get them on the right position, the right seat, on the right bus, and move forward with it. So we've talked about communication style, we've talked about assertiveness, we've kind of talked about pace and adaptability now, but there's one last cornerstone to the foundation of those natural behavioral traits, and that's really that need for structure. So are you the big picture, I'm going to blow things up and keep walking? Or are you more of that person who's, nope, I've got my color-coded calendar and everything is settled? Remember when we talked about the differences between sales and service? And one of the things that popped up was that we talked about that your successful sales need to have some resilience and have some detail orientation. And in that need for structure is where we see that come into play. So when it comes to behavioral insight, especially with the Omnia, those resilient salespeople tend to be more big picture visionary, right? They hear no, they're thinking not yet. They like to think outside of the box.
One of the challenges, though, are following the details, making sure that they're following guidelines, and don't micromanage me. Tell me what my goal is and let me get through it. It's what makes them successful in that sales role. It's what makes a leader successful as a leader, right? Because let's face it, if you're a manager or a leader, you're going to make someone upset. And it's not intentional, but it's going to happen. Someone's not going to like that you've had to talk to them about coming in late. They're not going to like some of the policies that are in place, but it's keeping an eye on the big picture, the overview, and moving forward with it. For your service people, when we're talking about that detail orientation, so maybe it's accounting, maybe it's claims, maybe it's underwriting, maybe it's technician, you want your car mechanic to have some attention to detail, right? Their strengths are going to be they're structured, they're detailed, they follow guidelines. But some of those challenges could be that they're a little sensitive to criticism and rejection, or they want perfection. They want to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And if it's not quite perfect, I'm going to wait a little bit longer. They could experience paralysis by analysis. And a challenge is thinking outside the box. Those detailed people tend to be very black and white. This is how it is. I am a planner. This is how I'm going to handle it. Once again, those are strengths that are great in certain roles, but they can be challenges in other roles. Knowing that is going to allow you to bypass this. So, multitasking is important in our role. What do you feel, are you a multitasker? Also, with that behavioral insight, it's going to allow you to say, okay, are they recommended? Where are they similar or dissimilar to our ideal role? Let's ask some questions. So instead of asking, talk to me about, are you a multitasker? Most people are going to say, yeah, sure, I can multitask. You're going to ask questions that are behavioral based. Like, tell me about a time that you had to work on 2 projects simultaneously. Walk me through that process. And now they're going to be drawing on past behaviors, past performance to give you a real strong indication of where we're going with this. This is what, yes, here's an example of how I multitask. And you're going to look at some of those things at the who, the whys, and the whats. How did they do it? And at the end of the day, it's all about what's in it for me. So thinking back to my 20-year-old self who was hiring for the very first time, I made a mistake. So behavioral insight really helps with avoiding those hiring mistakes. And it helps you identify how to position those employees so you can play to their strengths, to find those individual motivators for coaching, and then identify and mitigate those behavioral differences between the manager and the individual employee. Is this truly a bad employee, or is this someone who is struggling between maybe it's a communication breakdown. We've got different styles. How do we bypass that? And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that as well next week when we talk about taking the Omni assessment to the next level. So this is more of a quick overview, but we're really going to dive down next week on how to use that for developing, for succession planning, for mergers and acquisitions and understanding. And before we go into our Q&A, I do want to leave you with a quote from Akio Morita. He was the co-founder of Sony, and it says, "When I find an employee who turns out to be wrong for a job, I feel it is my fault because I made the decision to hire him." And that is something that just stuck with me as a hiring manager, as a believer of succession planning and moving forward with our employees to help them grow within the organization. I want to make sure that I hire the right person for that job. Doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Doesn't mean that they may not be a great fit for the company, but you've got to use that behavioral insight to say how well are they going to fit in to the position. So I do want to go ahead and open it up for any questions as we're waiting for questions. Once again, don't forget to sign up for taking the Omnia profile to the next level. And maybe you've never seen the Omnia profile and you'd like to take it. We have a free assessment that you can click on the link and put in the promo code.
One of the questions I'm typically asked is, how do you weigh the cost versus the of the tool versus when is the best time to, when should we administer a behavioral assessment? We always recommend that it be administered as early in the process as possible. That allows you to get a more natural response. Second question that I'm typically asked is, come on, they can fool the assessments, can't they? There are actually, especially in the Omnia, we're able to see those stressors to see if they're trying to evade the assessment or if they're truly giving the correct answers. So there's a lot more into it than just knowing the fit to the position, but also understanding really and truly kind of the motivation behind it. So I'm not seeing any questions coming up. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, join us next week, next Thursday from 12:30 to 1:30 to know about taking Omnia to the next level. Once again, we're going to dive more into the onboarding and development. Once you've hired them, now what? And we look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great day.